And Thomas Remington is a visiting professor of government at Harvard University. He's also an emeritus professor of political science at Emory University. He joins us now live from Cambridge. Thank you so much, Prof, for making the time. I mean, the Kremlin says Moscow is formulating its position. What kind of response are we looking at, if any, from President Putin?
I think these comments by President Zelenskyy, with a nod to the demands Russia has made after the negotiations that Stephen Witkoff has conducted, are in some ways a concession to the American administration. It could be that they will be sufficiently interesting for the Russian side that will allow them to serve as a basis for negotiation. As I reviewed them and reviewed Zelenskyy's comments, it struck me that they are incomplete, to say the least. The first thing that struck me is the call for the ceasefire comes at the very end of a whole series of agreements that the two sides would make. So the Russians are under no commitment to have to stop fighting. And yet Russia has to, force Ukraine to withdraw. There are a number of other problems with that. One that struck me was, although there's this new call for either a demilitarized zone or a free trade zone, call it as you wish, in these provinces that have been contested, there's no mention of how they would actually be governed, who would be in charge of them. There's so much that's incomplete in this. So in many ways, this is an offering by Zelenskyy to Trump in the hopes that Trump will then push Putin to negotiate further, because there's a lot of work to be done.
The plan conspicuously does not largely talk about territorial control, which President Zelenskyy has admitted is actually the most sensitive issue. What are the odds of Ukraine at some point having to cede territory based on the developments from this plan proposed by Zelenskyy?
In my opinion, I've said this frequently, I think the ceding of territory in a de facto way, not de jure, not as a matter of constitution or law, but a frank recognition that for the time being, under present circumstances, Ukraine is not contesting Russia's physical control of the territories beyond the current battlefield. In fact, this peace plan refers to the current, in effect, the line separating the two armed forces. If Zelenskyy says we acknowledge that we don't control that territory, and for the moment we're not going to push beyond it, that still leaves the problem of who will have overall civil control, civil administration, governing power for the full territories. It requires that Russia withdraw from its side of this border zone, this DMZ zone, to the eastern borders of those provinces, and Ukraine withdraw its forces. That leaves a kind of a no man's land, which nobody has discussed how that will be governed. For me, that's one of the gaping weaknesses in this proposal. But the proposal is an opening bid to what I hope will be serious diplomatic negotiation.
Prof, there's another sticking point on the security guarantees that Kyiv is seeking from the United States, from NATO, from the European Union, or from Europe, which insists that it will continue to back Ukraine, that's the EU. Just how realistic is this demand?
I would say, again, we're only at the beginning. This proposal mentions that there will be solid security commitments, but they're not defined. And it seems to me that at a minimum, a proposal is going to need to require peacekeepers, such as we have along demilitarized zones and border zones in many parts of the world, whether they're UN peacekeepers or European peacekeepers or coalition of the willing peacekeepers. There will have to be people on the ground ensuring that the Russians don't stray into Ukrainian territory. Wherever they demarcate the line separating the two forces, somebody's going to have to control and make sure that there isn't a Russian incursion. And that force will have to be, in effect, a trigger wire, such that if the Russians overstep it, then these so-called security guarantees, which the proposal said will be similar to the Article 5 guarantees in NATO, well, it means then there's a commitment by the coalition of the willing. It mentions 30 countries. There will have to be a commitment that they will then go to war to defend Ukraine against Russian incursions. Nothing like that has been proposed. And so far, all the signals from European leaders are they don't want to put their own people on the ground along the border. To me, this is another of the glaring weaknesses of the plan as it stands now.
Professor Thomas Remington there, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Very welcome.